It's September already. There's only a couple weeks of summer left officially, and that means we are approaching engagement season. The second half of the year, as we approach the holidays, is always the busiest time for couples to be engaged. I've just done a video on the top color gemstones for engagement rings. This is a major trend that continues because people are just looking for something a little bit more unique. And of course, as we are in September, and it just happens to be September's birthstone, here are 5 things you also need to know about blue sapphire, because it just happens to be the most popular and most purchased colored gemstone around the world. One of the most rational reasons is because it's found on nearly every continent on Earth, and so that makes it a lot more accessible than some other colored gems. But the other big reason is that the color blue is also the most favorite color around the world. It's kind of associated with loyalty and trust. It's a color that shares a hue with the sky and the ocean, and that just tends to put us at ease. As I mentioned in the best colored gemstones for engagement ring video, sapphire is actually a variety of the gem species corundum, and corundum has excellent hardness and toughness. It's a 9 on the Mohs hardness scale, so this does make it the absolute best gemstone other than diamond for durability as far as daily wear and engagement rings go. Of course, this does apply to all varieties of corundum, including ruby, so any color of sapphire is an excellent choice for an engagement ring. But of course, today we're going to focus on blue sapphires. I couldn't talk about blue sapphires without, of course, mentioning the most famous blue sapphire in the world, and that is the blue sapphire engagement ring of Diana, Princess of Wales. The 12-carat oval-cut blue sapphire ring, which of course is now worn by the current Princess of Wales, Catherine, really caused a stir at the time when Charles and Diana got engaged, and one of the biggest reasons for this was that it was actually chosen from a catalog, a Gerard catalog, which is a currently even very well-known British jeweler. Of course, why this was so unusual is because there are many royal jewelers that the royal family has access to, many heirlooms, and it was a lot more common for the ring to be custom made, and it still is to this day. So the fact that Princess Diana actually chose the ring herself and choosing it from a catalog made it feel very accessible, almost like anyone could really order it if they had the funds to do so. The other kind of unusual thing about this ring is that it is reported to be a Ceylon blue sapphire, and I'm going to touch on this more in a minute, but Ceylon refers to the island of Sri Lanka. It is by far one of the most famous islands for any gemstone, but for sapphires in particular. The reason why is because the metamorphic rock that exists on the island is known for producing very bright and lively gemstones, and sapphires in particular from Sri Lanka tend to have a little bit of a lighter tone, and they definitely tend to be more of that cornflower blue. Now, if you've seen this ring, which I'm sure you have, it's actually an extremely dark sapphire. Of course, I've never seen the ring in person, but it definitely photographs and shows on video as being extra dark, which is something that can happen sometimes. But this is definitely something that is not the hue that an ideal sapphire would be considered. It would usually be a little bit lighter, a little bit brighter. So the fact that this stone is quite dark is kind of unusual for such a famous ring. As I just mentioned, there are 2 very famous sources for sapphires. The most famous sources definitely by far are Sri Lanka and Kashmir, which is on the border of India and Pakistan. As I just mentioned, Ceylon sapphires from Sri Lanka tend to be more of a medium to even light tone of blue, and they're also famous for having even a violetish tint to them. So they tend to be more of what we call the cornflower blue, and again, this is a very light, bright blue. On the other hand, Kashmir blue sapphires are known for what some people call a royal blue color, which is that true kind of vibrant, bright, saturated blue, and they're also famous for having one other trait, which is what we call rutile silk. Rutile silk is when very long and thin kind of rutile needles form in the gemstone. And this, similar to a kind of spool of thread, when the light rolls across the gemstone, across all these little needles of rutile silk, it gives the gemstone a very kind of velvety appearance, the way that it reflects the light back to your eye. It's important to note that while Kashmir blue sapphires are extremely famous, and this term gets thrown around a lot, royal blue, Kashmir blue, these stones don't really exist anymore. They were only mined for a very short period of time at the turn of the century. And Kashmir is already a very difficult place to mine geographically. It's very hard to access. And then, of course, because of all the political strife, unfortunately, that has happened there over the last century, it really is a place that is no longer mined at all anymore. These mines are completely closed and have been since before the Art Deco period. So while it's definitely possible to find beautiful saturated blue, or even what you might call a royal blue sapphire, it's not going to be from Kashmir. So just keep this in your back pocket when you are out shopping for sapphires. You can definitely still find these beautiful qualities of stones, but they're not going to be from this geographic area, unless of course you are in a very high value market at auction level and are sourcing these very, very special and rare gemstones. The other important thing to remember is that just because a gemstone is labeled as coming from a particular place that is famous or well known for very high quality gems, it doesn't mean that every gem that comes from that area is going to have perfect color, perfect tone, and saturation. So it's very important to know that each of these gems have to be evaluated, and just because they've been labeled with a certain color or source doesn't mean that you should, just buy it right away because it's already been kind of identified for you. Everything should always be seen in person with your own eye, and sometimes even a second opinion from specific other gemologists, but you definitely want to evaluate it yourself. Don't take for granted that just because it's come from a particular place means that it's a perfect gemstone. If you are in the market for blue sapphires, other sources that you'll want to pay attention to are Madagascar and Myanmar, which is sometimes still labeled as Burma. These are also two sources very well known for high quality gemstones with beautiful color. You'll definitely want to check out our video on tone and saturation, and this is going to help you understand what to look for when shopping for a blue sapphire. The chemical composition of corundum is aluminum oxide, and it's trace elements that actually give sapphires their color. So as an example, if the trace element is chromium, which is a very rare element on Earth, you're going to get either a pink sapphire, or if the chromium levels are very high, you'll get a very rare red ruby. Now, if the trace element that's been introduced to the crystal while it's growing is titanium, that is what we need in order to create a beautiful blue sapphire. The highest quality and most expensive blue sapphires are going to be medium to medium dark tone of blue, or even a violetish blue. What's going to make a blue sapphire lose value and be a lot lower in price is if it has either a very, very light tone, almost like a watercolorish blue, kind of like an aquamarine, or a very light blue topaz, but that's quite uncommon. What you definitely see most on the market are very, very dark tone blue sapphires, and those are definitely of the less quality variety. So they're almost, a black, almost opaque. They don't have a lot of light reflection or sparkle or brilliance. The other low quality sapphires that we see a lot on the mass market, kind of like your mall jewelry store, for example, are blue sapphires that have kind of a greenish tint to them. What causes both the very dark tone of blue sapphire as well as the kind of greenish tint in a blue sapphire is the same element, and that is iron. So if we have titanium along with trace amounts of iron in the stone, the iron actually creates a lot of yellow in the crystal. Of course, combined with blue, we get that greenish color. And it can also inhibit, that light, bright, sparkly factor in a sapphire and make it kind of really dark and a little bit dull. So again, when I mention these very important sources for blue sapphire like Sri Lanka and Myanmar, these are places that geographically are known for having metamorphic rock, and they tend to be very, very low in iron, and that's why you get these very high quality, beautiful crystals. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have places like Australia and even Montana sapphires. These have become extremely trendy in the last decade or so. These are areas that have what's called basalt rock, and basalt rock is the opposite of metamorphic rock in the fact that it tends to be very high in iron. So we get those darker sapphires and sapphires that have a lot of that green color. Now, if you like that, then that's great. It's of course all up to your personal taste, but they should definitely be lower in the price range because you're definitely getting stones that have a lower demand. The last thing I'll mention with the quality of color of blue sapphires is that you should always remember that around 90% of gemstones in general, but definitely when it comes to blue sapphires, they are heat treated. So the heat treatment definitely helps lessen the effects of iron in a blue gemstone, and so it does make it less moss green, and sometimes it also helps it be a little bit lighter and brighter as well. One characteristic that is very common among blue sapphires is color zoning, and this refers to the fact that when the crystal is growing in the earth, sometimes again those trace elements of titanium that are required to give them their blue color, they can kind of come and go. They may not be present in the environment the entire time that the crystal is growing. So when the sapphire ends up being collected and you look at that crystal, you may see that it has these kind of perfect parallel striping pattern to it. And essentially it'll be stripes of, different qualities of blue from when the titanium was present, and then you might even have stripes of completely colorless crystal. Obviously, this is less than ideal. Nobody really wants that striping pattern in gemstones that they're going to use in their jewelry. So cutters will definitely try to avoid this. But sometimes it is unavoidable, and sometimes even in high quality crystals that are very large and have beautiful color, the cutter and the gem dealer and the jeweler, they're always going to be weighing these kinds of characteristics. If they feel like they can get a higher price per carat for a very large, high quality stone that might have a little bit of zoning in one area that's maybe not even in the center of the crystal, may not be super noticeable, or they can orient it so the zoning is maybe to the side or behind in the back of the stone, you may still see sapphires out there with this pattern. If you love blue sapphire, other gemstones you may want to explore that can have very similar color include spinel, tanzanite, which is known for having more of a violetish blue but can definitely just be a pure saturated blue, and even kyanite. Kyanite you have to be a little bit wary of because it can be very brittle. However, if you are setting it in earrings, for example, where there's not a lot of risk of it getting banged around, it could be an amazing, cost-efficient option for you. To learn more about sapphires in general, definitely check out our sapphire playlist to learn more about yellow and pink sapphires and even other phenomenal varieties, including color change and star sapphires. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to check us out on Instagram at Winston Gems and Jewelry.